Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. The Nigerian Senate may have to defy its upcoming recess to attend to President Muhammadu Buhari's ministerial list, according to Senate President Ahmed Lawan. Long overdue, going by the express opinion of a cross-section of Nigerians who are apprehensive that another lengthy delay in constituting the Federal Executive Council may spell calamity for the economy on a scale greater than the last time such a thing happened. We are now being joined here this morning by Dr. Austin Tam-George, a former Rivers State Commissioner for Information, a researcher and a consultant who has been monitoring good governance projects across Africa for the African Union. Austin Tam-George, welcome to the morning show.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, I mean, it's all over the news. Anxiety, uncertainty about President Buhari's expected ministerial list. Yesterday, when we heard that the Senate is willing to postpone its recess to be able to take a look at that list, we all thought that something will happen. But by yesterday evening, the Senate president turned around and said he never made such a promise and no list has been submitted. And the president himself says he's under pressure and he's taking his time to appoint people that he knows. For how much longer do you think we should wait?
I think it's been long in this unfortunate debate. I mean, it was never like this in this country where, people are elected into office, sworn into office, and then, anxiety mounts over, the team that should work with the president. I think it's unfortunate. It's not good for the investment climate, especially at a time like this when we have a very high unemployment rate in the country and across the states. I wish, that, and I suspect most Nigerians want to see that the cabinet is formed. Now, in the first term, the president often said that, well, the ministers only come only for their nuisance value. I mean, the permanent secretaries were there and they...
said ministers are noisemakers.
We are noisemakers, he said, unfortunately, But I have been in government and I know that ministers or commissioners are not noisemakers. They are actually the political heads of their ministries. And in Nigeria, every sector is represented by a minister or a commissioner. You have the permanent secretaries who are administrative heads of these ministries. But it is the minister who has to drive government policy on a sector-by-sector basis according to the ministries as they head. So the more, we have these ministers not appointed, the longer we don't have them in place, the greater the anxiety, that you have across the country. You get a sense that investors, for instance, are having to wait to know the specific ministers they've got to deal with on a sector-by-sector basis. So I think that it is very unfortunate. In the final analysis, in fact, the president will have to appoint Nigerians anyway. And he already hinted that some of those who served with him in the first cabinet may, in fact, return. If that is the case, I thought that would make it easier for him, in fact, to compose the list and send the ministers down to the Senate for screening. That hasn't happened, and I think that is very unfortunate indeed.
Well, he said he was looking for those he knows personally. What we might be able to infer is that he could mean those he can vouch for. But does that raise concerns about cronyism?
Yes, but it also raises concern about the commitment for excellence. I mean, we have over 200 million Nigerians here in the homeland, and then we have so many Nigerians, according to different sectors of expertise across the world. I would have thought that some of the very important existential challenges that we are facing would require that you the president will cast his net wide enough to bring as many experts as possible, including those who are not necessarily politicians.
Who are not necessarily known to him.
Yes, who are not necessarily known to him. And to insist that you want to deal with or appoint only those that you personally know. How many people will be within such a small circle, and how much of the pool of wisdom will it draw from? So my suggestion, because we've been in this thing before, would be for him to cast his net as wide as possible, get advice from as many experts as possible, so that, he could get people who can deal with the situation that we face. For instance, we have over 13 million children out of school, the highest of children out of school in the world. You don't need to know someone personally for him to be able to respond to this kind of sectoral challenge. You need an expert to be able to deal with this. We have, before 2015, Nigeria was on track for food sustainability. Now there's a great deal of debate happening in the agricultural sector. The fruits, the apples and the grapes that we eat that we see all the time on the streets of Lagos are actually imported from South Africa. That tells us that the agricultural sector, requires someone who has expertise, who may not necessarily be known to the president. So, what we are looking for, especially at a time like this when the president should be looking for his legacy, what legacy he's going to leave, would be to get the best possible people, wherever they may be, get them screened, and then let's get the government running.
Absolutely. We do need a cream of the crop set of people running our ministries. And the last set of ministers that we had, some people were happy with our ministers, of course, and some people had their oppositions to that. I want to take a look at the Ministry of Information under Lai Mohammed. You served as Commissioner for Information in Rivers State. So I want to know how you would assess the Ministry of Information over the past 4 years under Alhaji Lai Mohammed, and what you think we should expect if he gets another 4 years. I say this because the Nation newspaper yesterday reported on their front page that Fashola Mohammed and others, they said, although our sister outfit this day does not have confirmation of that, are set to return as ministers. So I'd like your analysis of Mohammed.
When you get into government, communication takes on a completely different spin. Communication at that level is not so much what you say as much as what you do. And so, whatever it is, that might have been the former minister's legacy, in the final analysis, it's up to Nigerians to judge, not according to what he said, but according to what the government, in fact, did. Look at the unemployment rate, as I said, very high. And in fact, the greater danger for me is that the president's delay in constituting his cabinet is setting a very bad precedent, even for the states. Apart from Akwa Ibom State, for instance, there is hardly another state that has a full cabinet in place. Yes, appointed. And it was, yes, it wasn't like this before 2015. I mean, forming cabinets, people that you work with to drive your agenda, an agenda you already canvassed during the campaign. This isn't mysticism. You ought to be able to identify those who will work with you. You have the constitutional liberty to fire them in any case if you think that they were not rising to the challenge of leadership. So why should we make this question of forming cabinet such a big deal? So I think that whoever eventually makes the list should be someone who has ability to deliver, not according to what you say. As Commissioner for Information, I didn't expect to be, judged according to what I said, but according to what the government, in fact, was doing, which was why, for instance, if I wanted to speak about government projects, I didn't just talk about, the governor is doing this, the governor is doing that. If I just took journalists exactly to project size to say, look, this was the situation before in this project. Look at where we are now. So people could tell for themselves. That's why, PRO professional schools, spin, around certain individuals and around certain agenda. But once you get into government, the people are not fools. They may not be in government, but they are not fools. They want verifiability. They want to be able to know whether you've been able to push the agenda in a way that changes their material conditions.
What you have not added is that the job of a government spokesperson is one of the most difficult jobs in government.
It is indeed.
Because when things go wrong, they blame the spokesman.
Yes.
Either the information commissioner or the minister, and they claim that it's because you have not communicated all the things that our guy is doing.
Yes.
Whereas that's not really the reality. So I agree with you. But let's talk about something else. The crisis of poverty in Nigeria. President Buhari has promised that he will lift 100 million Nigerians out of poverty between now and, is it 2029? Do you think with this pace, at the rate at which it's going and the pace that we have seen, that objective will be realizable in part between now and 2023?
Well, the best way to respond, to this kind of expectation would be to, ask what has been done in the past 4 years. We were in the poverty capital of the world in 2015, but we are now. What is going to change? What is going to be done differently?
Well,
we haven't.
Before you answer that question, that you yourself have defined, we'll take a short break.
No, we still have a bit of
We've
time.
got some time.
We still have time?
A little bit.
Oh, okay. Because
if you're going to put, if you're going to pull 100 million people out of poverty in the next 10 years, what it means is that in the next 4 years, beginning today, beginning when the president was sworn in, at least 10 million people will have to be pulled out of poverty per year. And if you don't even have the team, to give you advice, give direction, drive the implementation of government policy on a sector-by-sector basis. 4 months after the election, nearly 2 months after the swearing in, is a very unfortunate development indeed. In India, where they have over 1 billion people, the Prime Minister was sworn in, and within hours he announced a cabinet of over 50 cabinet ministers. It beats my imagination why it should be so difficult to identify Nigerians, both here in the homeland and in the diaspora, to help the president drive his agenda. The same thing for the states. I think this is something we need to emphasize a lot, because it's not just creating uncertainty. It's not just giving an impression that the government is not really rising to the emergencies that we face. I think it also speaks to the possibility of poor oversight in administration generally, because if you have commissioners in place, if you have ministers in place, there is a greater oversight. People tend to be a bit more careful. Even the president himself tends to be a bit more careful, because there are more stakeholders now. There are more eyes looking at what government is doing now.
We'll have to take the short break now, and then when we come back, you can continue with that line of thought. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Still with us in the studio is Dr. Austin Tam-George, former River State Commissioner for Information, a researcher and a consultant. Now, before we went on break, you were talking about the poverty challenge and the need to have, as a starting point, a team in place to ensure proper oversight to be able to achieve, to deliver on promises made.
Yes, and I was going to suggest that the more, you have these ministers delayed, the poorer, the thinking in administration will be, because when you hold cabinet meetings, it is the ministers who contribute their wisdom to the debate on policy on a sector-by-sector basis. And then you'll be able to say, look, I think I've got a better clarity on the direction to take. And because they've been part of the debate, when they go to their ministries, they'll be able to drive government policy. But when you have, this kind of delay, it causes all kinds of anxiety. So how will the government be able to raise, meet expectations that they themselves have raised concerning poverty alleviation, improving investment climate in the country, running a more inclusive administration? I think that Nigerians are very divided now, more than any time since the Civil War. And I would have thought that, this is an opportunity for the administration, to bring as many Nigerians as possible, irrespective of their political or ethnic affiliations, to make sure that we have a very inclusive administration, so that, we can tap into the genius of our people and run a proper administration. We don't seem to have that kind of thinking. In fact, what we are seeing is that if you have a history of criticizing government policy, then that means no matter how brilliant you might be, no matter how brilliant your ideas might be, you'll be excluded. We've had individuals excluded simply on the basis of holding critical opinions about government policy. I think this is a very unfortunate.
The president doesn't know you. Yes,
and I think this is a very dangerous trajectory we are on. I think we need to be able to put the country first, be pan-Nigerian in our thinking and even in our choice of those who will work with us. If we don't do that, it means, we are creating not just poverty materially, but poverty of ideas, because it means you will only have people who think exactly in the same direction with the administration. And sometimes, if you really want to break out of the current mode of thinking. You need people who, come from different orientations, have different perspectives, and then you'll be able to, synthesize, yes, all of these ideas and move the country forward.
Now, apart from the economy, we also have a huge challenge with security, which obviously affects the economy as well. So we've had this recent attempt from the presidency to boost morale, to boost esprit de corps with the promotion of certain officers, but it stopped short of replacing Lieutenant General Burutai. What is your view of that move? And also, I'd like you to discuss briefly the House of Reps bill for a commission to tackle the proliferation of small arms. Some argue that the last thing we need is a separate commission, that this is something the police ought to do. What do you think is the best way forward?
There's a great deal of concern about the competence of the service chiefs. It is not a new debate. But there is also another strand of thinking that seems to think that the issue is not even the service chiefs as much as the commander-in-chief himself. I think that, in leadership, the impulse actually comes from the leader, not so much those he is appointed, because those individuals could easily be fired. But, at a time when the president seems to valorize loyalty much more than competence, this is exactly the kind of result you would expect. I do not think that isolated promotions, of service personnel will necessarily make a material difference. They were due for promotion anyway, So what I would think would be, what I would suggest would be for the commander-in-chief himself, to think outside of the box, to use a popular cliche, outside of the box. Boko Haram is waging an unconventional warfare, meaning that conventional military responses will no longer suffice. So what you need to do is to make sure, they expand the net of those who are involved. How can we gather intelligence? How can we make sure we provide even a separate, strike force, with completely different, unconventional incentive structure, to those who will take the maximum risk to make sure we get the results we want. I don't think that conventional military thinking will get us out of the situation. Concerning banditry and kidnapping, I think these are ultimately, consequences of the mass poverty that we have. When I was in government, one of the arguments I always put forward was that there was only a limit to what guns and bayonets and bullets can do in terms of tackling unemployment. We need to create jobs, create opportunities, make sure that people, wherever they are located in this country, have the impact of government policy in their material lives on a day-to-day basis. If you don't do that, these are things that will continue to happen. I think that the money we spend, fighting, getting all of this hardware to fight, insecurity should better be spent on education, on skills training, on mentorship programs, so that people can, look at their lives as having meaning. One of the ideologies of Boko Haram is that, if you are able to blow yourself out, up in a crowded market, a bunch of virgins will await you in heaven. Anybody
21.
here, 21 of them
21
will await you in heaven. It takes a particular kind of naivety, to fall for those kind of things. And I think education, de-radicalization programs, investment in mentorship programs, those are the things we need much more than simply changing military personnel and promoting others.
Or creating new bureaucracies.
Yes, and creating new bureaucracies. Concerning the question you asked about the House of Reps,
the bill to establish a commission to tackle proliferation of small arms.
I don't know of many decent Nigerians who take pride in carrying arms. These are problems of unemployment, problems of, people who are looking for alternative structures of support for themselves. I believe that the more opportunities that we have, the lesser and lesser the tendency for people to go into illegal arms trade. But when there's a mass market, it will create an alternative economy of its own, so that people will say, well, if there's a market there, why don't we feed this market, import, arms into the black market and supply? And once people get hold of small arms, the greater the tendency for them to commit crimes. I think we need to really rise to the challenge of leadership. It's heartbreaking, the kind of things happening in this country. If you travel to some of these African countries around the corner, you know, there is a momentum of development. People are moving forward. People are struggling. There is a debate about the direction they want to take. But in Nigeria, you know, apart from scattered instances of people, you know, wanting to engage with the system, there is no broad debate on the new frontier that this country should move. It's very heartbreaking indeed.
Unfortunately, it wasn't always like that.
It wasn't always
country.
like this.
We had the SAP debate, the structural adjustment debate
in the 80s.
across Nigeria in the 80s. And we had an intellectual class, you know, that was, you know, engaging those in power.
That intellectual class, Ruben, that you refer to, you know, also constituted the middle class. You know, in Nigeria, someone once said, you know, recently that there's a race to the bottom. You don't really have the rich. You have the poor and the poorest. You know, so there's a race to the bottom now. You know, and people tend to be very, you know, superficial in their analysis because a deeper level of analysis will require that you criticize what is going on. And
well, since you mentioned the SAP debate, what was the practical good that did? The government still went ahead with that disastrous policy. So that might also disincentivize people from speaking up.
No, but there is a public memory of, you know, those who were opposed to it. For instance,
and what good did it do?
Well,
the government
you know,
went ahead.
well, we can refer to it at least.
That they tried?
No, to have a good society, you must have a current of thought.
Yes.
You must have
But
ideas.
I'm saying that when those ideas are not admitted at the highest levels, when those ideas are completely dismissed at the highest levels, it tends to discourage such discourse.
Let me tell you one of the good things that happened, you know, with that SAP debate. There was always this counter-narrative that, look, why should we always look up to the World Bank or the IMF, you know, to provide, you know, systems of economic thinking, you know, for this country, and that there must be alternative ways, indigenous, domestic, you know, to Nigeria that, you know, can pull you know, all sorts of our circumstances. If you check one of the statements by Moshood Abiola, you know, when he was alive, you know, actually contending for political office, he made it clear that, look, the genius of our people is enough to move this country to any height. He was going to drive this country, pulling from the collective wisdom of our people. That was one of the, you know, resolutions that came from that debate. Up till now, I think, you know, Nigerians realize that there is a limit to how much, you know, we can depend on so-called panaceas coming from the IMF and the World Bank. In fact, in Malaysia, around the same time we are having that debate, they were having the same debate in Malaysia. And what the Malaysian presidency did, Malaysian authorities did, was to say, look, anytime the IMF give us a particular idea, we did exactly the opposite. And we arrived, yes, and we arrived, you know, at a better result. So I think public debate, even for the sake of knowing the alternatives out there, is always necessary. But these days, my fear is that there's a poverty of debate. There is a great deal of political polarization. And people tend to look at things only through the lenses of political affiliations. And, you know, it dooms, yes, it dooms all of us, because I'm in a situation where somebody has been taken on the basis of the person's skills and merit. And then you say, no, this person should be dropped simply because the person had expressed a critical view about government policy.
Are you referring to the essay to the President of the Senate?
Yes, and in fact, just yesterday, someone who was critical of the policies of the governor of Kaduna State, you know, was nominated by the governor himself to be a commissioner in his cabinet. But yesterday, the Kaduna House of Assembly had eliminated him to say, look, my friend, we saw a bunch of posts that you put out there on Facebook being critical of this government. We can't have you. And it was just the only one who was rejected in the pack. So when you do that, you are imposing a poverty of thought, you know, on the country. Look, we cite a lot of examples from the U.S. Some of the fiercest, you know, critics of even Donald Trump, he put them as, you know, either spokesman of government. In fact, one of his fiercest critics turned out to be appointed as the U.S. special permanent representative to the UN. You know, there was nothing Hillary Clinton didn't say about Barack Obama, but she ended up as his Secretary of State. So we need to have that broad thinking to say, look, we can have competing visions about the
Very
direction.
right. The anti-intellectualism of the ruling elite in Nigeria is
know,
a major threat to
yes,
progress and
yes.
development.
And when you have that, side by side with mass poverty, it's a double whammy.
Thank you very much,
Dr.
Dr.